Okay, this next section is about rational exponents, and I think the easiest way to look at it is something like this, where I have x to the a times x to the a is x to the fourth. So it's saying what would that a value have to be so that when I multiply x to the a times x to the a, I get x to the fourth. And a is equal to 2 because x squared times x squared gives me x to the fourth. Okay, which means that anything times itself is something squared, right? So if I went backwards and said what's the square root of x to the fourth, that would be what times itself gives me x to the fourth, which is one of these, x squared. Okay, if I do the same thing like this, if I have the same thing here, this is a b, right? X to the b and x to the b, and I get x to the sixth, well, that b value would have to be 3 because x cubed times x cubed gives me x to the sixth. Okay, which again, if I look at it backwards as a square root, if I take the square root of this, it means what times itself gives me x to the sixth, and that would be x cubed. Okay, which again, you've looked at in previous sections in this chapter. However, when it comes to something like this, where I have x to the c times x to the c is x, or x to the first power, it's a little different because these two things have to be the same, but they have to add up to 1. So they would have to be 1/2. So x to the 1/2 times x to the 1/2 is x to the first power. And similarly with these previous ones, if I take the square root of x, because that's what I'm starting with here, if I go backwards, I get x to the 1/2. And that's the big idea in this section, is what is that fraction exponent, and the square root of x is the same thing as x to the 1/2 power. It's just another way to represent it. So if I take a look at this one where I have 3 of these multiplied, but they end up being just x to the first power. Well, if I'm breaking that into 3 equal pieces, then that value would have to be 1/3. Okay, which again, I'm looking at x to the 1/3 times x to the 1/3 times x to the 1/3, and those would add up to x to the first. But now I'm looking at going backwards. I'm saying what multiplies by itself 3 times to give me x. So that would be the cube root of x is x to the 1/3. And so again, that is another way to represent a cube root, is the same as that number to the 1/3 power. Okay, so that denominator of the fraction is the root that you're taking. So the 1/2 power would be the square root, the 1/3 power would be the cube root. Okay, so that's what this section is about.